This doesn't work. Sorry to break it to you, but taking the leaf cutting from this snake plant and hoping to get a clone of the plant just won't work. Nope, won't work. I won't hear it. But Mr. Sheffield, I've seen this done tons of times. What are you talking about? I've even got lots of snake plants at home taken from leaf cuttings. Okay, let me be more specific. They won't work for variegated snake plants. No, taking a leaf cutting of a variegated snake plant such as this, hoping to get an exact replica, and you'll be sorely disappointed. It just doesn't work. Instead, you'll just get the ugly, non-variegated version. Sorry, not ugly, I mean original form. I don't want a mutiny on my hands. The variegation doesn't keep, you see. For some reason, it reverts back to the original plant. Why? Well, I've no idea, actually. Hopefully someone in the comments will enlighten us all. Are you that hero? But Mr. Sheffield, I love this plant and I want to have more of them for free in my house as well as to give away as cheap Christmas presents. Ah, yes, well, all is not lost, my friend. You can indeed propagate this guy, but it must be done through division. Pull its trousers down, expose its private parts, give everything a fondle, separate into multiple clumps, and dress them up into individual pots. Admittedly, it's not as fun as leaf propagation, but it's the only way you'll keep the variegation, I'm afraid. Oh, and ignore the fact that one of my very first videos on this channel was propagating a snake plant through leaf cuttings. I was clearly still a noob at that point. I love perlite prop boxes. The problem is, Mrs. Sheffield doesn't. And whatever Mrs. Sheffield says around here, we do. If you're not familiar with what perlite prop boxes are, then let me change your plant propagating life, provided you have a supportive other half that will allow you to have one, of course. If you're watching Mrs. Sheffield, that's a joke. You're very supportive. Sometimes. Perlite prop boxes then. They're simply clear plastic tote boxes, you know, the ones you can pick up from IKEA, filled with moistened perlite that you stick your cuttings into, put the lid on, and the perfect environment for cuttings to root is created. Honestly, they're like plant magic. Paul Daniels would just love them. Cuttings seem to root twice as fast as with jars of water or soil, and I put that down to the high humidity that is created with the lid on. The only problem is, and this is the crux of it for Mrs. Sheffield, they take up a lot of space and, well, they look pretty damn ugly. I mean, where are you meant to keep this thing? The answer to that is near your window to give the cuttings the maximum light they need, and finding a place in your home that is near a window and not in the way of everything is a challenge. It is for us anyway. If you're struggling with rooting cuttings in water, then I highly recommend trying these perlite prop box setups, provided you have the space and don't have the aggro. You'll be a propagating wizard in no time. So yes, I now do as I'm told and propagate in jars or glasses of water. And to be fair to her, it does look a lot better. Get it right and it can even look quite decorative, similar to a vase of flowers. Not convinced? I'll move on then. The problem I find with water propagations is that things tend to get a little bit slimy. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? You fill the jar with water, pop your cuttings in, roots appear within a few weeks, and then yay, new shoots start to appear a couple of weeks after that. It's still not quite ready to be potted up because the roots aren't that mythical length of 2 inches yet, and you don't want them to die. But what's this? The new shoots are starting to go slimy. Yes, this happens to me quite often, and as far as I can see, it's for 2 reasons. 1, I'm lazy and don't change the water often enough. Stagnant water tends to go slimy and horrible, and this puts the new shoots on the turn. The solution to this one is simple. Change the water every week. Good job I don't charge for these tips, eh? The second reason is that I think I have too much water in the jar. The cuttings need just enough water for the roots to develop and then stay hydrated, and not so much that any new stems and leaves that develop are left to perish deep in water. You certainly don't want the whole cutting drowning in water anyway. It will just turn into a slime fest of epic proportions. So, you've had your cuttings in a jar of water for what seems like an eternity, and you finally have roots long enough to be potted up into soil. You feel like a champ because you just created life like our almighty father, and no one can bring you down. But what's this? The cuttings you potted on 2 weeks ago have all died. How can that be? All those months of hard work and endless patience was for nout. Nada. Niente. I mean, what on earth happened? You didn't water them enough, our kid. Sorry. You listen to idiots on YouTube telling you not to water your plants until the soil dries out fully and applied it to your new babies. Easy mistake to make, and one I've done plenty of times in the not too distant past. The problem is your new babies have developed fragile water roots. These little guys are super sensitive and nowhere near as robust as hard, gruff soil roots. This means they need to be babied in the first few weeks of their lives. Keep the soil moist at all times so that they can adjust and start to develop robust secondary roots acclimatise the soil. Do this for about 3 or 4 weeks and then start to taper off. Don't go cold turkey, just taper off the water gradually until you water them like any of your other houseplants. And for everything you need to know about watering your plants, then check out my online course. Great fun, and you'll learn tons of tips on how to be a better plant parent. Link in the description. Something that took an eternity to get my head around with plant propagation was the requirement to remove most of the leaves from the cutting. I mean, you're even meant to cut large leaves in half. I know, criminal, right? There's nothing more precious in the world than the foliage of our tropical plants. I say that and I've got 2 kids. Don't judge me though. The thought of cutting into the leaves like a savage made me feel sick. What a waste. But the truth is, the less foliage a cutting has, the happier it will be. If you have a cutting with tons of large leaves on it, then it's just going to have a hard time developing roots. You see, it's just losing too much water through the large surface area of the leaves that it's not getting enough juice left to grow roots. I think that's the science anyway. I'm no botanist, okay? When I was starting out on my plant propagation journey, I used to think the leaf you used to propagate was a keeper, so I was far too precious about it. But in reality, this leaf soon goes by the wayside as soon as the plant grows a new stem. It serves its purpose at the beginning of life and then is discarded like an unwanted puppy. So keep your cuttings to a maximum of 2 or 3 small leaves, and if you've got a large one on the stem, consider cutting it in half. It should make the rooting process much quicker. Here's a cheeky tip that I wish someone had told me when I was starting on my plant propagation journey all those many moons ago. You don't need rooting powder. Hopefully you're not choking on your toast right now that I've said that, but honestly, rooting powder is just not needed. I used to diligently dip all of my cuttings into rooting powder like a good boy before putting them into my Perlite prop box, but this was just a waste of time and money. Cuttings will root just fine without rooting powder. I really didn't notice any difference in the speed or success rate of cuttings dipped in rooting powder compared to those that weren't. I've now come to learn that plants really want to survive. They'll do anything to do so, the poor little suckers. Give them something to grow into and some light and they'll develop roots. It's as simple as that. Keep your hard-earned dosh. And light really is the key. It's the single biggest factor on whether you're going to be a plant propagation whisperer or not. I get lots of comments in my videos asking me why their cuttings are taking so long to root. My answer is always the same. You're not giving them enough light. Cuttings actually need a lot of light. I find that even if I keep my cuttings right next to my window, it's still not enough for quick rooting. You probably know all about my climate by now. It's damp, dark and gloomy. I'm sure I've mentioned that before. Well, it's just not favourable for rooting cuttings. And this is exactly why I always root all of my cuttings under grow lights. And I mean always. I don't ever bother going au naturel anymore. It's the only way to near enough guarantee that I'll get roots in a few weeks. Look, I have 2 propagation stations in my house under grow lights that even Mrs. Sheffield absolutely adores. And as you can see, things are rooting rather nicely. If you're on the market for some grow lights, then I do highly recommend Sansi, and you can get 15% discount using my affiliate link down below. And no, that wasn't all just some long plug to sell some lights, by the way. I do genuinely only root under grow lights. Picture the scene. You've got the creative juices flowing, so you go and grab a plant and cut a nice long stem piece off. You work your way along the stem diligently, cutting into individual cuttings, because you're a plant pro and you know what you're doing. You make a mistake here or there with a couple of stem pieces though. You know, you might have taken off the top leaf rather than the bottom leaf, which as we all know won't work. You want the leaf to be at the top so it doesn't sit and rot in water. No big drama, we've all done it. We'll just discard that and move on to the next one. Once you're done, you hoover up all the pieces and lob them in the bin. Whoa, 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 hold your horses, not so fast. Don't chuck those leafless stem pieces in the bin. they're still viable cuttings though, you know. Yes, cuttings don't necessarily need leaves. Surprising, I know. These are actually called wet sticks in the trade. I was like you. I used to chuck these in the bin thinking they were useless, but even these guys will grow roots and stems and turn into fully fledged plants. Look, I've got 3 on the go right now. 2 Philodendron verrucosum wet sticks that have developed roots and stems without leaves to capture the light. The other one is taking its time, but it's not rotting, so I'll be patient and leave it to do its thing. Amazing, isn't it? All you need to do is make sure there is a node from which roots will come. I did this to a Monstera wet stick 2 years ago, and I've now got this plant out of it. New leaves are coming out fenestrated, so success all round. A super ingenious hack to stop your cuttings falling into the water of your mason jar is to wrap the top of the jar with some cling film, puncture a few holes in it, and then poke your cuttings through. The cutting will be supported by the cling film and not swimming and rotting in the bottom. This is just one of 13 awesome plant hacks I talk about in this video linked on the screen right now, so give it a watch. You won't regret it, and subscribe.